On a calm March night in 2024, nothing seemed unusual on the waters of Baltimore. But inside the engine room of the cargo ship Dali, a small electrical fault was seconds away from triggering one of the most shocking bridge collapses in American history. A tiny loose wire, a complete blackout, and a ship weighing more than 100,000 tons drifting out of control. How could something this small cause damage this big? And why did no one see the danger coming? Tonight, we break down the chain of failures, the human stories, and the national risk revealed by the Dali Crash in Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge was one of the largest steel truss bridges in the United States, an enormous arch-shaped structure stretching 1.6 miles across the Patapsco River. It opened in 1977 and formed a key part of Interstate 695, the beltway that circles Baltimore. Every day, about 34,000 vehicles used this bridge. That included more than 3,000 trucks, many carrying hazardous materials that were not allowed through Baltimore's tunnels. For the city and for the region, the Key Bridge wasn't just a road, it was a lifeline. But below it ran another artery, just as important, one of the busiest shipping routes in the entire United States. The lower Patapsco River connects the port of Baltimore to the Chesapeake Bay and then to the Atlantic Ocean. Through this channel, massive cargo ships travel day and night. MV Dali is a large container ship registered in Singapore. At the time of the crash, it was operated by Synergy Marine Group and owned by Grace Ocean Private Ltd, both Singapore-based companies. The Dali is a Neo-Panamax vessel built in 2015. It's almost 1,000 feet long, about as tall as a 90-story building laid on its side. It is 157 feet wide and sits 40 feet deep in the water. A ship of this size is designed to carry thousands of containers across the world's major trade routes. Over the years, the Dali had been inspected many times, 27 port inspections in total. In 2023, 2 more checks were carried out, one in Chile, where a fuel pressure gauge was repaired, and another in New York by the US Coast Guard, which reported no issues. In March 2024, the Dali's crew consisted of 20 Indian sailors and 1 Sri Lankan. The ship had recently sailed from Panama to New York, arriving on March 19th, before moving on to Virginia and then Baltimore. When it reached Baltimore, on March 23rd, the crew performed engine maintenance while the vessel was docked. According to one anonymous source, an alarm from the ship's refrigerated containers went off during this time, possibly caused by unstable power on board. At the time, it didn't appear to be a major problem, but it would later become a key detail in the events that followed. In the early hours of March 26, 2024, the MV Dali prepared to leave the port of Baltimore. At exactly 12:44 a.m., the massive container ship set out on its journey to Colombo, Sri Lanka. 2 local harbour pilots were on board, guiding the vessel through the harbour, standard procedure for ships leaving Baltimore. As the Dali moved into the main channel, the tugboats that had assisted it were released. From this point on, the ship relied solely on its own engines and steering. But at 1:24 a.m., everything changed. Without warning, the Dali suffered a complete blackout. All power to the engines and steering was lost. The ship began drifting sideways, sliding out of the safe channel. A backup generator kicked in, giving power to lights and basic electrical systems, but it did nothing to restore propulsion. The crew had no way to control the vessel's movement. 3 minutes later, at 1:27 a.m., the pilots issued a mayday call. They warned Maryland transportation officials that the Dali had lost all propulsion and that a collision with the Francis Scott Key Bridge was likely. As the powerless Dali drifted toward the Key Bridge, one of the harbour pilots made a critical decision. He urgently requested that all traffic on the bridge be stopped immediately. Moments later, the ship's lights suddenly went out, then flickered back on. A few seconds passed, and the lights died again. When they returned, smoke was seen rising from the ship's funnel. clear signs that the crew was desperately trying to restart the engines. At 1:27:53 a.m., the pilot's warning was relayed to Maryland Transportation Authority Police. Dispatch ordered officers to block traffic in both directions. Within just 20 seconds, police stopped all vehicles heading onto the outer loop of the bridge. Traffic on the inner loop was halted at 1:28:58 a.m., almost the exact moment the collapse occurred. Meanwhile, as part of emergency procedures, the Dali's crew dropped the ship's anchor. It was a last attempt to slow the vessel down, but with a 100,000-ton ship moving toward a concrete pier, there was only so much they could do. At 1:28:45 a.m., the MV Dali struck the southwest pier of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The ship was moving at roughly 8 knots, about 9 miles or 15 kilometers per hour. Minutes earlier, tracking data showed it traveling even faster, at almost 9 knots. As it drifted out of the channel, its speed dropped, but not nearly enough to avoid disaster. The moment the ship hit the pier, the force was overwhelming. Within seconds, the enormous steel truss above began to tear apart. Sections of the bridge snapped and folded, crashing into the Patapsco River. The roadway in the center span collapsed completely, cutting off both approaches and leaving twisted pieces of steel rising out of the water. A large section of the bridge fell directly onto the bow of the Dali, coming to rest across the ship like a crushed skeleton of metal. When the bridge collapsed, several vehicles were still on it. At first, authorities believed no one was inside them, but a crew of maintenance workers had been repairing potholes that night. During their break, they were sitting in their vehicles, parked directly on the span that fell. Nearby residents later said they woke to a deep, rolling rumble that shook their homes. One man described it as feeling like an earthquake in the middle of the night. At 1:30 a.m., yet only moments after the collapse, the first 911 calls began pouring in. By 1:35 a.m., Baltimore police had been informed that the Key Bridge was gone. Emergency responders launched a massive rescue operation. The U.S. Coast Guard sent out boats and a helicopter to begin searching the dark waters of the Patapsco River. On land, teams rushed to the shoreline. 50 public safety divers, organised into 8 separate teams, were deployed into the river, searching for anyone who might have fallen when the bridge gave way. The scene quickly turned into one of the largest rescue and recovery efforts the region had ever seen. The force of the Dali's impact was almost unimaginable. According to engineering estimates, the ship hit the bridge with a force somewhere between 27 and 52 million pounds. To understand how massive that is, the Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever built, produced about 8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. The force of the Dali's collision was several times stronger than that. Out of the Dali's 4,700 containers, only 13 were damaged during the collision. 2 of them fell into the water, but neither contained hazardous materials. The ship itself suffered major damage above the waterline. Huge pieces of the fallen bridge, an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 tons of steel, were left resting on the bow. The weight pushed the ship firmly against the bottom of the channel. At the time of the collapse, the water beneath the Key Bridge was only 47 degrees Fahrenheit, just 8 degrees Celsius. In water that cold, survival becomes extremely difficult. Soon after the bridge fell, 2 people were rescued from the river. One was in very serious condition, while the other survived without injuries. One of the survivors, a Mexican national, later told his lawyer that he escaped his sinking car only by manually rolling down the window before it went under. But for others, the news was much worse. 6 members of the maintenance crew who had been working on the bridge were missing. After long and difficult search efforts, the Coast Guard suspended active rescue operations. The workers were presumed dead. All 6 bodies were eventually recovered from the water by May 7th. The first recoveries came on March 27th, when divers found the bodies of a 35-year-old Mexican national and a 26-year-old Guatemalan national inside a red pickup truck, resting 25 feet below the surface. On April 5th, the body of a 38-year-old Honduran national was found inside another submerged vehicle. Then, on April 14th, divers recovered yet another victim from a construction vehicle buried under the debris. At the family's request, this person's identity was not publicly released. On May 1st, the search teams made a breakthrough. They recovered the body of 49-year-old Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez from a red truck that had been trapped beneath the collapsed structure. 6 days later, on May 7th, the sixth and final missing victim was found. He was identified as 37-year-old Jose Minor Lopez of Baltimore. With his recovery, the long and emotional search finally came to an end. Soon after the collapse, the National Transportation Safety Board launched a full investigation. A specialised team was sent to the site to begin collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and securing the ship for examination. The FBI also arrived, but quickly announced that there was no sign of terrorism. This was a tragic accident, not an attack. On March 27th, authorities established a unified command centre to coordinate every part of the response, from investigation to salvage. Because the ship was registered in Singapore, international investigators also became involved. Singapore's Transport Safety Investigation Bureau sent experts to Baltimore, as did the Maryland Port Administration. Both offered direct support to the NTSB and the Office of Marine Safety. Late on March 26th, just hours after the collapse, NTSB investigators boarded the MV Dali. One of their first tasks was to retrieve the ship's voyage data recorder, the VDR. This device works like an airplane's black box. It captures crucial information that helps investigators rebuild the exact timeline leading up to the crash. From the beginning, several possible causes were examined. One early theory suggested the ship might have taken on contaminated fuel or fuel of the wrong grade, which could have triggered the sudden loss of power. Investigators also focused heavily on the ship's electrical system and circuit breakers. They worked directly with Hyundai Heavy Industries, the company that built the Dali, to understand how the system failed. On April 15th, the FBI launched a criminal inquiry. Agents boarded the Dali to determine whether anyone on the crew, or the companies involved, knew of electrical or mechanical problems before the ship left port. By May 8th, anonymous sources told the Wall Street Journal that the FBI was examining possible violations of the Seaman's Manslaughter Statute. This law allows for up to 10 years in prison for ship officers, crew members, owners, or charterers if negligence leads to loss of life. On May 14th, the NTSB released its preliminary report. For the first time, investigators revealed what happened to the Dali in the hours before it ever left the port of Baltimore. The ship had suffered 2 power outages while still in port. The first outage happened about 10 hours before departure. A crew member accidentally closed an engine damper while working on the exhaust scrubber system. This blocked the engine's exhaust path, caused the engine to stall, and shut down power. The second outage occurred when the backup generator lost fuel pressure and shut off. To deal with the issue, the crew changed the ship's electrical setup. They switched from the transformer and breaker system they had used for months to a different configuration, one that would be active during the accident voyage. But the NTSB report made one thing clear. Investigators were not yet ready to say that these earlier outages caused the blackout that led to the bridge collapse. The team explained that the relationship between the in-port failures and the power failures at sea was still under review. Fuel testing also ruled out another early theory. There was no contaminated fuel on board. On May 15th, during testimony before the House Transportation Committee, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy said the outages in port and the outages during the voyage were mechanically distinct. She explained that switching circuit breakers after a power loss is common practice, but changing the ship's electrical configuration may have played a role in what happened later. Months passed, and the investigation continued. On September 12th, the NTSB released a 41-page update. This time, they had concrete evidence. During tests on the Dali, investigators found a loose electrical cable in the transformer and breaker system, the same system the ship had switched away from before leaving port. This loose connection could have caused unstable electrical behaviour and may have contributed to the blackout that left the ship powerless. So now the question becomes ours to answer. Should we rebuild exactly what was lost, or redesign our infrastructure for the world we live in today? Who should be responsible for preventing disasters like this? Are we doing enough to protect the people who work on and under our bridges every day? Tell us what you think. Share your thoughts, your concerns, or your ideas in the comments below.